The first scream came from behind the blast doors, thin and metallic, like air tearing itself apart. Sergeant Elias Rourke froze with his hand still hovering over the control panel, the red evacuation lights washing his armor in blood-colored pulses. The alien warrior slammed against the transparent barrier on the other side, four clawed hands striking the surface in frantic rhythm, mandibles flaring wide in desperation. "No, please leave them in," the creature cried through the translator collar, its voice cracking between rage and fear. Elias swallowed hard because he understood every word. Behind the warrior, dozens of smaller shapes huddled together in the containment chamber, their luminous eyes reflecting the chaos, their bodies trembling as the station alarms wailed. They were not soldiers, not fighters, not even prisoners of war. They were civilians. The station itself was dying. Hull breaches along the outer ring vented atmosphere into the void, and the enemy fleet had already burned through the last defensive line. Human command had been clear, brutally clear. Secure the data cores, extract personnel, purge the rest. The purge protocol blinked on Elias' display, waiting for confirmation. Biological containment, sterilization, irreversible. A clean solution, command had said, no risk of hostile bio-capture. The alien warrior pressed its face against the barrier, eyes wide and wet. "They are my clutch," it said, voice shaking. "My young, my elders, they cannot survive your ships. Please, please leave them in." Elias turned his head away for a moment, staring at the scars etched into his gauntlet, marks from battles he barely remembered. He had fought these aliens for 3 years across 6 systems, had watched friends die screaming under plasma fire. He had learned to hate their armor, their ships, their war chants. But no one had taught him how to hate a parent begging for their children. "Sergeant," crackled the comm in his ear, "you have 30 seconds. Enemy boarding teams are closing in." Elias exhaled slowly, forcing his breathing to steady. He stepped closer to the barrier, meeting the warrior's gaze. "If I leave them," he said quietly, "they die when the station goes, or worse, they get captured." "They will die anyway," the alien replied, "but they will die together, not alone in your cold machines." Another impact rocked the station, throwing Elias against the console. The containment chamber lights flickered, revealing the smaller figures clinging to one another. Some stared at Elias with fear, others with curiosity, and one very small one lifted a hand toward the glass. Elias felt something crack inside his chest. Memories surfaced unbidden, a child's laugh on Earth, a sky that was blue without filters, a promise he had made before boarding his first transport. He had sworn to protect humanity, not to become a monster in its name. "Sergeant," command barked again, louder now, "execute the protocol." The alien warrior straightened, drawing itself up despite the terror, its posture suddenly proud and unyielding. "If you must be the executioner," it said, "then look at us when you do it." Elias' fingers hovered over the final confirmation. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on that single motion, the lives balanced against doctrine and orders. He realized with a hollow ache that no choice he made would let him walk away clean. The small alien at the glass pressed both hands against it now, mimicking the warrior behind it. Its eyes were bright, unafraid, trusting. Elias closed his eyes for half a heartbeat. When he opened them, his jaw was set and his hand moved. The containment field disengaged with a low hum. The barrier shimmered and vanished, releasing the chamber into the corridor air. The alien warrior staggered forward, stunned, then turned back toward its people in disbelief. "What have you done?" it whispered. "I cannot take them," Elias said, voice raw, "and I cannot kill them. The station will fall in minutes, but the inner ring escape pods are still intact." The warrior's eyes widened, understanding flooding its features. "You are condemning yourself," it said softly. Elias nodded once. "I know." Another explosion tore through the station, closer this time. Elias activated his beacon, transmitting a false completion signal to command. Protocol executed, he reported, even as he tore the insignia from his chest and dropped it to the deck. The alien warrior gathered its people, ushering them toward the emergency pods with fierce urgency. Before entering the last pod, it turned back to Elias. Why, it asked, not as an enemy, but as a soul trying to understand another. Elias met its gaze, the alarms screaming around them. Because some lines should never be crossed, he said. The pods launched moments later, streaking away into the chaos of space. Elias stood alone in the corridor as enemy footsteps echoed through the station. He raised his rifle, not as a soldier of command, but as a man who had made his choice. And somewhere in the void, lives continued because he had disobeyed. The first enemy trooper rounded the corridor corner with its weapon already raised, its armor blackened and angular, eyes glowing behind a visor that reflected the station's dying lights. Elias fired without hesitation, the recoil thudding into his shoulder as plasma splashed across the bulkhead. The trooper collapsed, but two more followed, boots pounding metal in relentless cadence. Elias moved on instinct now, retreating toward the junction where the corridor split into maintenance shafts. The station groaned around him like a wounded beast, every vibration a reminder that time was bleeding away. He did not expect to survive, but survival was no longer the point. A shot grazed his side, heat searing through armor and flesh. He hissed but kept moving, diving into a narrow access tunnel just as return fire scorched the space where his head had been. The tunnel was dark, cramped, and smelled of coolant and burned wiring. As Elias crawled forward, his thoughts refused to stay quiet. He kept seeing the small alien's hand pressed against the glass, the way it had trusted him without knowing why. That trust felt heavier than his rifle, heavier than his wounds. Behind him, shouts echoed, alien voices sharp with anger and triumph. They believed the purge had been executed, that the station was clean. Soon they would learn otherwise, and when they did, the consequences would ripple far beyond this wreck. Elias emerged into a maintenance hub overlooking the inner ring. Through a fractured viewport, he could see the stars smeared by drifting debris, escape pods flashing as tiny comets fleeing disaster. He searched for them desperately, hopping, irrationally, to catch a glimpse of the pod carrying the warrior and its people. Another explosion rocked the ring, collapsing part of the structure inward. Elias was thrown to the deck, his vision blurring as alarms shifted into a steady death tone. Structural failure imminent, evacuation impossible. So this is it, he muttered to himself. He pushed himself upright and checked his remaining ammunition. Not much, but enough to make a statement. If command had taught him anything, it was how to delay an enemy at terrible cost. The sound of footsteps approached again, heavier this time, coordinated. A full boarding squad. Elias positioned himself behind a fallen console, bracing his rifle, breathing slow and deliberate. As the first trooper entered the hub, Elias fired, dropping it instantly. Chaos erupted as the others returned fire, bolts tearing through equipment and sparking showers of light. Elias felt strangely calm, each movement precise, every shot measured. He was no longer fighting for victory. He was buying time. Time for pods to clear the blast radius, time for lives to escape the shadow of annihilation. A voice cut through the noise, amplified and authoritative. "Human soldier," it called, "stand down." Elias risked a glance and saw an enemy commander step forward, taller than the others, markings etched into its armor. "You falsified your report," the commander continued. "We have confirmed biosignatures escaping." Elias almost laughed. "So you noticed," he said. "You have violated the laws of war," the commander said, you have doomed your species to retaliation. Elias tightened his grip on the rifle. Maybe, he replied, or maybe I just reminded the galaxy we still have a conscience. The commander tilted its head, studying him. You spared them, it said slowly. Why? Elias hesitated, surprised by the question. Because they weren't my enemy, he answered. For a moment, the hub was silent, except for the distant rumble of tearing metal. Then the commander raised a hand, signaling its troops to hold. You chose empathy over efficiency, it said. Your command will erase you. They already have, Elias replied, thinking of the insignia lying abandoned on the deck. The commander stepped closer, weapon lowered slightly. In our doctrine, it said, mercy is weakness. Elias met its gaze without flinching. Then maybe that's why this war never ends, he said. The station shuddered violently, lights flickering as gravity faltered. A warning blared, core detonation sequence active. Even the commander stiffened at that. This station will not survive, the commander said, nor will you. I know, Elias said, but they will. Something unreadable passed across the commander's expression. It turned away sharply, signaling a withdrawal. Leave him, it ordered. The void will finish what we do not. The enemy troops retreated, boots fading into the distance. Elias slumped against the console, his strength draining rapidly now that the fight was over. Blood pooled beneath him, warm and slick. He activated his suit recorder, voice trembling just slightly. This is Sergeant Elias Rourke, he said. If anyone ever hears this, remember that orders are not the same as morality. The station began to tear itself apart, bulkheads buckling as fire consumed the core. Elias looked once more toward the viewport, imagining distant stars, unfamiliar worlds, a clutch of aliens waking somewhere safe. His vision dimmed as the final explosion blossomed outward. In that last moment, he felt no regret, only a quiet certainty that some choices mattered more than survival. Far away, in the cold silence beyond the battlefield, an escape pod drifted. Inside, the alien warrior held its people close as the station's light vanished behind them. It closed its eyes and whispered a word that had no perfect translation, but came close to gratitude. And the war, unchanged yet subtly altered, continued. The escape pod drifted in silence long after the station's destruction faded into distant light, its hull scarred but intact, systems running on minimal power to avoid detection. Inside, the alien warrior sat unmoving, cradling the smallest of its clutch against its chest, feeling the faint rhythm of breathing that proved they were alive. Around them, the others slowly emerged from shock, whispers passing in soft clicks and low tones, fear giving way to exhausted relief. They had survived, but survival came wrapped in confusion, grief, and a debt none of them knew how to name. The warrior replayed the human's face again and again in its mind, the steady eyes, the trembling resolve, the way he had chosen disobedience over annihilation. In its culture, such an act would be recorded in song, passed down through generations as a paradox, an enemy who had become a shield. A soft chime broke the stillness as the pod sensors detected a weak gravity well nearby. An uncharted moon, barren but stable, its surface pocked with ancient craters. The pod adjusted course automatically, engines flaring briefly before cutting out again. When the pod finally settled onto the gray dust, the warrior rose unsteadily, extending limbs stiff from hours of stillness. This place will hold us, it said to the others, voice low but certain. For now. They disembarked cautiously, the thin atmosphere biting cold but breathable with effort. Shelter was improvised from the pod's hull plating, energy cells rerouted to provide heat and light. They worked in silence, each movement driven by instinct and survival. Yet beneath, every task lingered the memory of the human soldier. The one who had stayed behind. The one who had chosen them. Light years away, the consequences of that choice began to ripple outward. Human High Command received the after-action report with satisfaction at first. Station purged, enemy presence eliminated, assets denied. It was only later, when long-range sensors picked up anomalous life signs in a supposedly sterilized sector, that doubt crept in. Investigations were launched quietly, analysts combing through fragmented telemetry. One name appeared repeatedly in corrupted logs. Sergeant Elias Rourke, status listed as killed in action. Some officers accepted the explanation without question. Others frowned at the inconsistencies, the missing biometric confirmations, the strange delay before the final explosion. A seed of unease was planted. On the enemy side, the commander who had spared Elias watched similar reports surface. Escape pods detected, civilians unaccounted for. The commander said nothing, filing the data away, altering patrol patterns just enough to let certain shadows slip through unnoticed. War had taught it to recognize leverage. But something else stirred beneath that calculation, something dangerously close to respect. Weeks passed, then months. The alien survivors adapted to their moon, carving shelter into stone, cultivating resilient native organisms, raising their young beneath an unfamiliar sky. Stories were told at rest cycles, and always, inevitably, the story of the human returned. They named him something untranslatable, a word that meant protector through sacrifice. The smallest of the clutch learned the shape of that story before it learned the stars. Elsewhere, skirmishes continued, fleets clashed, worlds burned. Yet subtle changes began to emerge. Human soldiers hesitated before executing certain orders. Alien units paused when encountering non-combatants. Tiny deviations, easily dismissed, but cumulative. In one distant battle, a human captain rerouted fire away from an evacuation corridor, claiming a targeting glitch. In another, an alien patrol allowed a refugee transport to escape sensor range, recording a false negative. None of these acts ended the war, but they changed its texture, softened its edges in places no strategist could easily quantify. On the moon, the alien warrior stood atop a Ridge 1 cycle, gazing up at a sky thick with unfamiliar constellations. It wondered if somewhere among those lights, humanity remembered Elias Rourke, or if he had already been erased into silence. The thought filled it with a strange ache. "We will not forget," it murmured, more promise than statement. Years later, a damaged probe would crash near the settlement, its markings unmistakably human. The warrior would approach it with cautious curiosity, extracting its data core. Inside would be fragments of history, language, art, and a record of the war as humans saw it. Among the files would be a memorial list, thousands of names long. It would find Elias Rourke's name there, unadorned, uncelebrated. But to the warrior, it would shine brighter than any honor. Far from that moon, in quiet corners of human space, rumors circulated among soldiers and civilians alike. Stories of an officer who disobeyed orders to save alien lives. Of a station that did not purge as cleanly as reported. Of mercy that refused to stay buried. Official channels dismissed them as myths, morale fiction, enemy propaganda. But myths had power, especially among those tired of endless bloodshed. The war ground on, but its certainty began to fracture. The idea that the enemy was purely monstrous no longer fit as neatly as it once had. Faces intruded where abstractions used to live. And somewhere on a forgotten moon, children who had once been marked for extermination grew strong, curious, and thoughtful. They looked to the stars not with hatred, but with questions. Questions about a species that could destroy worlds. And about one human who had chosen, in a corridor filled with alarms, to let mercy breathe. The echo of that choice traveled farther than any weapon ever could.